Hi everyone, in this tutorial we're going to be going over some of the different repair tools in Photoshop. Alright, let's get started. So the first tool I'm going to show you is the Clone Stamp tool. That can be found right underneath the brush tool here, and you can get to it by using the shortcut key S. So what the Clone Stamp does is it takes pixels from one part of your image that you select, and it's going to clone those and put them over a different section of the image. And I'll show you how it does that, but first I'll just take a look at the options up at the top here. So you have your different brush sizes like we usually have. I'm going to do the soft round brush. We have our different blend modes here, but I usually just leave that to normal. We have our opacity and flow. Now we haven't gone over flow yet, so I'm just going to quickly show you what the difference between opacity and flow is. Okay, I'm just going to select my brush and I'll change the color. Okay, right now I'm going to paint at full opacity and full flow. So you get a fully opaque brush stroke. If I lower the opacity, we're going to get it at 50%, and you'll see that I can paint over it as long as I'm holding down the mouse button still, and it's not getting any more opaque, it's staying at that 50% transparency. If I let go of the mouse and then click again over it, and then we start to layer it up. The difference between opacity and flow, I'll just turn the opacity back up, and I'm going to turn the flow down, and I'll turn it way down. So with the flow, it almost looks like the opacity. You're getting a less opaque version of it, but with the opacity I can paint over it, and it's not going to make it any darker. With the flow, you can layer up your paint with the same mouse stroke being held down. So if I go back over it, you see it darkens up the places where I've already painted. So you can go over top of your paint stroke and just start to layer the paint in thicker, as opposed to the opacity one where you'd have to let go of your mouse and then click again to start to layer up that paint. This is just a quick crash course on the brush. I'm going to have a tutorial on it later, so we'll go into it in more detail. Alright, let's go back to this image and use our Clone Stamp tool. So before I start painting with the Clone Stamp, I'm just going to make a duplicate of this layer, because similarly with the burn and dodge tools, all of the changes you make with this are going to be permanent. They're not going to be on an adjustment layer. So I'm going to make a duplicate of my layer as a backup in case I make too many changes that I don't like. I can just go back to this one. I'm also going to open up my history panel so I can go back in my history if I want to. And I'll do that by clicking on it here. And if you don't have it here, again, you can go to Windows and go down to history. So I don't like how it covers up my image here, so I'm just going to grab it and drag it and then drop it over maybe here, and it's going to drop it into this panel here. Okay, now how the Clone Stamp works is that you want to hold down Alt or Option on your Mac, and you're going to get this little icon here. Now you can select any area on your canvas, and I'm just going to click here, and you'll see that that section shows up in my Clone Stamp here. So now, keep an eye over here, because when I click, you're going to see a little crosshair icon. And so that crosshair is going to move with my brush, and whatever is in the crosshair is going to be replaced here. So I'm just going to click over here, and you see the crosshair appears there. And now as I drag down, it's painting in everything that that crosshair sees. So I can paint in all of these vines that are from over on the right here, just by using the Clone Stamp. And if I come over too far, you see the crosshair is just about to go off the leaves there. Now I'm painting in rock because the crosshair is over those rocks. And if I let go, I can just select any other part I want and then paint those in as well. I'm going to just undo that for now. And I'll show you what happens if you get to the edge of your photo. You want to be careful, because if you get to the edge, your Clone Stamp is going to start to paint in that edge. So I'll select these vines from over here, and I can paint them in, but watch my crosshair. If I get too close to the edge, then I'm starting to paint in the edge of the photo here. And you can see that hard line, and there's the corner of the photo. And I'm just going to undo that. So that's what the Clone Stamp does. You can use it to clone parts of your image and move them to another part, and it's great for erasing out parts of your photo. So if I didn't want this vine here, I could select some of the rocks here, and then just come over it and paint it out. You want to be careful though, since it is a feathered brush, it is going to start to overlap some of the pixels, and it'll get a little blurry if you go too much with it. So if you keep on going over, I'll just show you an example here. It's going to get kind of blurry and just a little muddy in there. So you want to use it sparingly and just be careful what you're cloning. All right, I'm just going to close out of this one. And we're going to move on to our next tool, which is the spot healing tool. So what the spot healing brush tool does is allow you to click on an area and it's going to automatically repair it based on the pixels around it. So I'll just show you how to use that one. First of all, we're going to want to rasterize our layer because it's not going to let us use these tools if it's a smart object. So I'm going to right click on it and hit rasterize. And now we have our little brush here and we have some different settings up here. We have our brush size settings, and you can also, again, just use your brackets to make it bigger and larger. We have our mode, but I'm just going to leave that as normal. And then we have some types here, which is content aware, create texture, and proximity match. So what content aware is going to do is take the content from all around here and factor that into its calculation when it blends it. Create texture is going to add a bit of a texture to it, which we don't want on this one. And the proximity match is going to do the best it can based on the pixels around it. So right now I'll leave it on content aware. I'm going to make a duplicate of this so you can see the before and after. And I'll just click on a blemish and it's going to automatically clean it up. Might want to make my brush a little bigger. And then you can just go through and click and it's going to automatically clean those up for you. We can try create texture up here, and if we click, I'm just going to zoom in, but you can see it kind of makes a texture there. So I'm going to undo that because I don't like that, and we'll try again. So let's try proximity match. So proximity match and content aware both work really well. And it's really easy just to click through and do some quick spot cleanups. All right, so that is the spot healing brush tool. I'm just going to close out of this one. And next we're going to take a look at the healing brush tool. So if we click on our spot healing brush tool, we can go right below it to the similar band-aid icon. So what the healing brush tool does, it's very similar to the clone stamp tool, except it's going to do its best to blend the new pixels that you clone over into the original. So I'll just show you the difference between this and the clone stamp. So our clone stamp is just taking these pixels and laying them over it. It's not trying to blend them. But with the healing brush tool, when we select our pixels and paint over, you can see that it's trying to blend it into the rock. Okay, I took this crooked picture of a Banksy at one of the museums in Amsterdam, and so we're going to try use the healing brush to take the heart out here. So I'm going to make my brush a little smaller, and then like with the clone stamp tool, you have to hold down Alt and then select a part of the image you want to stamp over. So I'm going to select up here because this color is pretty similar to the color behind it. So I'm just going to click, let go, and now I can paint over. You can see my brush right now is a really hard brush. What I'm going to do is just go into my brush settings and bring the hardness down a bit. And that's going to soften up the edges. Okay, and now I'm just going to brush over the balloon here. So that took it out perfectly. So what it does is takes those pixels, lays them over, and then blends them together. I'm just going to undo that. And I forgot to make a duplicate of this, so I'm going to do that now so I have a backup. And I'll just show you how the clone stamp handles this. I'll click off over here, and now I'll just paint over it. So it does a pretty good job, but since it's not blending them, you can see the color difference from up here to over here. And so you see that little spot there. All right, I'm just going to undo that. And I'll show you another tool in here that we can use, which is the patch tool. So what the patch tool does is let us select part of the image we want to take out and then move it and grab a patch from a different part. And it's going to do its best to blend them as well. So I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm just going to draw over this heart here. And it can be kind of rough. And then I just want to drag it over. So I can drag, and you see anywhere I have this separate one, it's going to make a patch from there. So you want to select an area that looks pretty similar in color. Maybe something like that. And then you let go. and then you need to deselect it. So I can go up to select and do deselect, or hold down Control D. So I'll deselect it. And so that took a patch from over here and patched it pretty much perfectly. You'd never know that that heart balloon was there in the first place. So we can try it here as well. Just roughly go over her. And then I'm just going to slide it over to about, maybe about there. I'll let go. And see, it was lighter here, but it does its best to blend it to the original. And then I'll hit Control D, and there. We have a perfectly empty piece now. Okay, so next I'm going to show you the Content Aware Move tool and also the Content Aware Fill. And the Content Aware Fill is one that I use a lot in Photoshop. Alright, so I have this photo with the two geese. And so with the Content Aware tools, I can either move this goose here, or I can completely edit him out. So what I'm going to do is just double click on this to unlock the layer. And I'll make a duplicate. So I have a backup. And we're going to go over to our Content Aware Move tool. And like with the patch tool, we're just going to draw over our goose here. And then I'm going to move it out of the way. And what it's going to do is take the goose that I moved and try to blend it into its new spot. And also try to fill the background behind it as best as it can. So let's try that. I'm just going to click and draw around the goose. Now I have the selection on him. I'm going to just click and drag. And so it hasn't deleted out this one yet, but it will. We just want to drag this one to where we want it. Maybe over on the ground here. I'll let go. And now you just have to hit enter. And it took it out from here and moved him over here. And we can just hit deselect now. So it tried to blend it best it can. We do have a little bit of color change here, where you can see that it probably doesn't belong here, but you can go in now with different tools like the clone stamp or the spot heal brush and just clean that up. Let's try it again with this goose here. So I'm just going to draw around it. I'm going to include the shadow too and just move that with it. And then I'll grab the goose, maybe put it over here somewhere, and I'll hit enter, and I'm going to deselect it. So it moves it over. Leaves a little bit of a smudge, but if you were just looking at this photo, you would never know that that's where the goose started out, and this is where we moved it to. And so we have a little bit of cleanup here we can do, but for that, I would just go in with the healing brush tool. It still has our old selection, so I'm going to hold down Alt, grab some of these pixels here, make it a little smaller, and you can just paint over. We might not want to blend it with the healing brush tool, so we can try our clone stamp tool and just replace those pixels completely. And yeah, that works actually a little nicer, not blending it. So you want to use these tools combined with each other just to get that final look. Alright, I'm just going to delete out this one. Here's the difference between the two. I'll take out this one, and now I'll show you the Content Fill tool. I'm just going to make another duplicate of this. So what the Content Aware Fill lets us do is select part of our image, and I'll just grab my lasso tool here. You can use any way you want to select it. I'll just zoom in on one of the geese here, and I'm going to draw around it. And then what I'm going to do is come up to Edit, Fill. So we have some fill options here. Our contents. We have foreground color, background color, and that's going to fill it with either red, the foreground color, or black, the background, or we could choose a color. We have some different options down here for what we want to fill it with, but the one we want to pick is Content Aware. So I'm going to select that. So what the Content Aware does, like the Move tool, when we move the goose, it filled the area behind it. So what it's doing is instead of us moving it and filling, it's just going to cover over it and fill that space. So if we don't want this goose here at all, we would use this tool. So now that it's selected, we have Content Aware selected, and I'll just hit OK. I'm going to deselect that. So you can see it does its best to base its calculations on what's around it. We have a little bit of an issue here where some of that water looks like it's spilling out over to the gravel here. So what I can do is just grab my clone stamp tool. I'm going to stamp some of the gravel here, make my brush a little bigger, and just paint over that. And let's try it with this other goose over here. So we'll just select it, get the shadow out of there too. Go up to Edit, Fill. You can also use Shift F5 to bring it up. So Shift F5. And we have it set to Content Aware. You can also change the opacity if you don't want to completely cover it up, but we want to take the goose out completely. So I'll just hit OK. I'll deselect that. And that did a pretty good job of getting it out completely. So that's how you use the Content Aware Move and the Content Aware Fill tools. All right, and lastly, we have our red eye tool, which is exactly what it sounds like. It just removes red eyes from photos. So I'll go over to this project over here, and I have a few different examples. I'm going to hold down and make sure I select my red eye tool. And right now they're all smart objects, so I can't click on them. We have multiple ones in here, and you can convert multiple images to a raster if I just select all of them, right click, and hit rasterize layers. So now all of those are rasterized. All right, so with the red eye tool, it's really simple. All you have to do is click on a red eye and Photoshop does all the work. So I'm just going to hover over it, click, and Photoshop will clean that up. Make sure I have the right layer selected. Click on those, and it automatically gets the red eye out. And it does a really good job of it too. There, it's as easy as that. That's the red eye tool. All right, I'm just going to quickly show you how we can use a combination now of these tools to do some photo repair. So I'm going to double click on this to unlock my layer. I'll also duplicate it so I have a backup copy in case I mess up. And we'll paint on this one. So the first thing we want to do is get rid of this big crease here, and many of the tools we just covered will achieve that. So first one I'm going to try is just the healing brush tool. I'm going to make it a little smaller. And I'm going to sample from over here. So I'll hold Alt, click. Now I have my sample, and now I'm just going to brush over it. So you can see the crosshair moving down the side of it on the left. So those are the pixels we're sampling, and we can just paint over it. So that did a really good job actually of getting it out. We have a little bit up here. I'm just going to click, sample some of that, and click there. Let's try some of the other ones. Let's try our spot healing brush tool. So with this one, we can just go through and clean up some of these little specks that are probably just dust specks. And I'm just going to click on some of these little pieces. We can even get out some of those. Yeah, so you can use that to clean up some of the dust and scratches. Let's get rid of this one with our clone stamp tool. And if the clone stamp tool doesn't blend it nice enough, we'll go back to our healing brush tool. So I'm going to select my clone stamp, make the brush smaller. And so here I'm going to select some of the pixels here to try to clean up here. So I'll select those. I'm going to make it a little smaller also. And then I'm just going to paint over it. And that took it out nicely. So for this part here, I'll select some of the dark pixels here because they match what's underneath. And just paint down there. I'm only going to go up to the hair here where it's brighter. And I think I'll select some of the pixels here. And I can just click over and kind of spot clean that. Now this looks like part of a scratch and not actually the hair. So I'm going to just click beside it. And paint that over. Same with this scratch here. All right, so we got out that big one, and we can just go back and forth to see the difference. And now we have this scratch here. For that scratch, our healing brush tool would work, but let's try use the content aware fill. So what I'm going to do is grab my lasso and just kind of select around this area. And if this doesn't work, we'll try something else. So I'll go to Edit, Fill, Content Aware, hit OK. And I'll just deselect that. And wow, that did a really good job of cleaning that up. So to get this piece out here, I could use my content fill, but I'm going to try use the patch tool first. So I'll select my patch tool, and I'm just going to draw around it. And now I'm just going to move to an area that kind of matches the color and tone. Maybe something like that. I'll let go, and then I'll deselect it. And that patched it. And that did a pretty good job. You can kind of see that the colors don't really match, but it's so close that I don't think anyone would notice. And we could come in with our clone stamp and kind of fix that too. But let's just try our content fill to see if it does a better job. I'll quickly go around it. We'll go to Edit, Fill, Content Aware selected, and hit OK. So that didn't do too bad of a job. I think though the patch cleaned it up better. We kind of get this dark area here and you can see the color change. So I would use the patch for that. I think down for this piece here though, the content fill would work well. We'll just select that, go to Edit, Fill, hit OK. And yeah, that took it out nicely. I'm going to zoom in here. And for this, maybe we'll try our healing brush tool. Make it a little smaller. And let's select from up here on the arm. Select from up here, brush some in. From here, I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. I'm going to select up in here, brush that in. And for down here, I'm going to select some of that just to clean up that area and some of this over here. And then we can also just quickly do that area right there. So there's still some parts we need to clean. We should clean that up here. I'll just do that quickly with this one. But you get the idea. We can easily do some quick photo restoration with just these repair tools. All right, that's going to do it for this tutorial on the repair tools.